Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Silver Spook, and this is part 2 of my Altered Carbon review slash cyberpunk analysis. So, first up, there have been a lot of bad reviews recently piling up, but Altered Carbon, in my personal opinion, was great. So, set your eyeballs to binge, no matter what the 280 character attention span press and the bought and paid for media matchmaking algorithms are telling you. In the post-truth, post-fact world, you need to see cyberpunk content with your own two eyes, or ears for the visually impaired, because the revolution will not be televised. In particular, this tech noir artifact. So, Altered Carbon, really great. If you just click off this video right now, immediately go watch it, check it out, and form your own opinion. All right, into the nitty-gritties. From a review on the site IO9, the other big weakness of Altered Carbon is in the investigation itself, and pretty much everything that happens inside of that damn police station. Martha Higuereta is good as Detective Kristen Ortega, and I love the inclusion of her family to represent those who refuse to re-sleeve for religious reasons. But for as much time as we spend with Ortega and Bay City's finest, nothing ever happens. Unquote. So, and this is my opinion. So I found the police station to be particularly illuminating, actually, as part of the internal mechanisms of a neo-feudal, post-social democratic society. Lieutenant Ortega's continual struggle to do her actual job, which is protecting and serving the public, is continually thwarted by the hollowed-out and corrupt police department, which is essentially just the leg-breaking force of the ultra-rich meths like Bancroft. Captain Tanaka repeatedly orders Ortega off of actual cases investigating the deaths of murdered girls. Tanaka and the department does the bidding of meths, even outright telling Ortega, "You can try to do a little good here and there, but this world is owned by the meths, and don't take me down with you." That's what the police chief tells his lieutenant, citing his mortgage and pension as the leash the elite keep him complicit with. Omo Prescott, Bancroft's lawyer, is similarly a grounder, but rather than bunkering fearfully into her cushy crony position and trying not to rock the boat, Prescott aspires to rise through the ranks of insignificant human fireflies, as one meth calls them. She has a Macbethian ambition to climb the hyper-corporate ladder by lying, cheating, stealing, backstabbing, and getting rid of all of the human baggage to become a meth herself. Scenes between Tanaka and Prescott reveal this. "You just wish you were one of them," Tanaka accuses. "I will be one of them," Prescott retorts. This, for me, is Altered Carbon at its finest and most cyberpunk, where it shows the real meaning of a future dominated by mega corporations, which is a cyberpunk, one of the core pieces of cyberpunk. It shows the way in which public institutions like the rule of law and defense of public good are subverted and left as window dressing, a charade of badges, uniforms, and meaningless courtroom theater to lull the common serfs into believing their government and institutions are by the people, for the people. As Bancroft himself says, "In this world, you're either the purchaser or the purchased." It is fundamentally barbaric feudalism and something all too extant in our world today. In the United States, 98% of all political campaign finance comes from less than 1% of the population. Court cases are not rational and fair examination of facts leading to justice, but rather barbaric cage fights between corporate warlords of who has the most money for lawyers, fees, and pull, and things like that. Peter Thiel throwing over $100 million to crush Gawker in court is a relatively benign example. Look at the millions who lost their homes in the foreclosure crisis after 30-second sham hearings before a judge sweating bullets to turn 100 grannies homeless by lunchtime. Or look at HSBC, the giant criminal bank that admitted it was the money laundering arm for murderous drug cartels and journalist beheaders working for Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, ISIS, and other enemies of the state. HSBC's leashed Tanakas and Omos, the so-called regulators, asked them for a 2% cut of $80 billion and let them continue committing crime, treason, and slaughter of over 100,000 Mexicans. For a more recent and cyber exhibit, let's take the FCC's evisceration of net neutrality, despite an overwhelming majority of Americans supporting it, led by crooked ex-Verizon lawyer Ajit Pai, a Prescott-esque lawyer certainly looking to become a meth in the Verizon or Comcast castle one day. This is, for me, the raging core of Altered Carbon, and the fundamental problem of extreme inequality that is highlighted by Cyberpunk, by extension. The broken system that creates such, and the fundamental problem of extreme inequality, and by extension, the broken system that creates such. The R greater than G, or what economist Thomas Piketty identified as the return on investments exceeding growth, or the past devours the future. The immortal, undying elite, hundreds of years old, continuously eating all future generations, profiting from them, enslaving them, literally using them as their personal tools, sex objects, murder toys, gladiatorial combat entertainment, and other uses, which is a perfect example of some of the core aspects of Cyberpunk. This is the Achilles heel of the capitalism colossus. Although a race of undying, moral-free trillionaires inhabiting stratospheric palaces at Versailles would undoubtedly exacerbate the catastrophe, we don't need immortality to create a separate race of destructive Ubermensch, because we already have one now in 2018. So the Kovacs origin story and the related Kellis attempted revolution against the Protectorate and the cortical stack technology itself had some of the best acting and storytelling of the show. In particular, Will Yun Lee, who plays the earlier original sleeve of Takeshi Kovacs, and Kel as well. And that entire sequence is one of my favorite parts of the show. Kovacs was raised, Takeshi Kovacs, the main character of the story, was raised by an abusive and murderous father, whom he barely survives, along with his only sister Rei, on one of the extrasolar colonized planets. I believe in the book it was Harlan's World, a reference to Harlan Ellison, author of deeply absurd and violent cyberpunk-ish spec fic, including I Have No Mouth and I Am a Scream, you should check out if you haven't yet. Kovacs is found as a boy, barely at puberty, by the Protectorate, an interstellar federation that polices the galaxy, taking out terrorists, warlords, yakuza, and other enemies of the transplanetary state. Morgan's book version serves as a pretty thinly veiled, and I said my opinion, critique of a particular imperialistic superpower's serial invasions of other countries under pretenses of rooting out dictators, taking out terrorists, spreading democracy, and fake weapons of mass destruction. But I digress. Young Kovacs is informed by Commander Yeager in Virtual that he can help protect from the bad men, like his father, shortly after he's arrested, if Kovacs would only sign up for the military. Staring down false murder allegations, Kovacs enlists and becomes essentially a child soldier, such as those shown in Beasts of No Nation, but with a man's body. He later defects, for spoiler reasons, and joins up with a group of freedom fighters, classified of course as terrorists by the powers that be. The protagonist has known literally nothing but violence, a series of bloody wars, both domestic and foreign, in which the stoic, alienated man was forged. At the heart of Altered Carbon is a Chandler-esque neo-noir story, as is the heart of much of Cyberpunk, including Blade Runner and Neuromancer. Morgan himself has commented on this extreme violence, which many commentators have criticized both the book and the TV show of relishing in. So this is a quote from Richard K. Morgan in an interview he did for Clarkesworld magazine about a decade ago. Quote, I think one of the problems with the sickness, if you like, that we've got in Western culture is that we're scared to acknowledge these things. And he's talking about the violence and slaughter in war. We're afraid to actually take them on board. That idea that you sort of got a sick enjoyment out of killing as a soldier, is just not acceptable currency, because we're told we must see our soldiers in these glowing, honorable terms, rather than seeing them as human beings. One of the aspects of American policy having to do with military matters is that there's an enormous amount of emphasis on the troops as long as they are standing up, holding their arms. But as soon as you ship them back home broken or damaged or unable to cope, suddenly no one wants to know about them anymore. The amount of coverage there hasn't been of all the post-traumatic stress and the incidents of guys coming back from Iraq who just cannot cope with what's been done to them, that stuff just isn't covered. The media has no taste for it. But we're talking about human beings here, and human beings are complicated mechanisms. And when they get damaged, that's complicated too. Unquote. That's Richard K. Morgan, the author, speaking about 8, 9, 10 years ago. This was a fundamental aspect of film noir, or the World War II era existential literature and cinema of the 40s. Humphrey Bogart, the star of Casablanca and The Maltese Falcon, two of the great noir classics, was in fact a Navy veteran wounded in World War I. This post-traumatic stress-ridden human fallout of all of these soldiers returning from the field and unable to integrate back into society, the darkness, cynicism, and apathy resulting from having seen and done horrible things on the battlefield, or even more terribly, having enjoyed them, is the cold gunmetal heart of noir. Kovacs is the neurochem augmented 23rd century Rambo, coughed up after multiple tours of napalm bombing off-world rice paddy farmers and cutting down unionizers and rebellious sweatshop workers with full metal jacket rounds. An unwanted, despised criminal, the lost soldier tears the limbs off of everyone and everything in his way, questioning his very existence and almost icing himself after nuking his mind with every illegal drug he can find in finest Burroughsian fashion. This sort of mid-20s, male-brooding, introspective nihilism, often to the point of extreme drug use and suicidal tendencies, is the deeply lodged, lingering bullet fragment in the mind of cyberpunk. And this is a quote from Neuromancer to illustrate this. William Gibson's Neuromancer. A part of him knew that the arc of his self-destruction was glaringly obvious to his customers, who grew steadily fewer, but that same part of him basked in the knowledge that it was only a matter of time. And there are several other references to the Neuromancer protagonist's death wish. This truth of noir and neo-noir as the post-traumatic failed warrior male reintegration and cultural fallout of war is rarely made more clear than in Richard K. Morgan novels. The truth that foreign violence is only the beginning. The domestic violence is where war often hurts the most. This is even more clearly illustrated in the second two novels, Broken Angels and Vulcan Furies, in the Altered Carbon series. There is indeed much violence, mutilation, scenes of extreme torture. At one point, the protagonist is locked in a Matrix-like sim in which he is repeatedly tortured to death through a variety of ways, including immolation, only to be resurrected and killed again. Kovacs himself kills more people than Neo does in The Matrix. I suppose you could argue he merely causes terminal organic damage to the sleeves, but that distinction is somewhat semantic in a visual medium. But perhaps the grotesque and uncomfortable aspects of the violence is in part to remain faithful to the book, and simultaneously to not sanitize the results of the violence, as Morgan states is his goal. The world of Altered Carbon is a science fictional dystopia, after all, and thus the repulsion to it by the viewer is part of the point. We should really try not to produce this future. If you watch Black Mirror or 1984 or any other dystopian show, the point of that is not let's use that for a roadmap for where we're going. Let's like not do that. That's kind of the point, right? So I think a lot of the critics who came out with negative reviews of Altered Carbon, or saying I don't think Altered Carbon has much to say, may be suffering, and I don't want to over psychoanalyze people I don't know, but they may be suffering a case of corporate tunnel vision, or as Bancroft might say, The blindness of the purchased. Okay, on Bancroft's Ministering to the Masses as a Living God, there's a scene in which a rich philanthropist attempts to show just how much he cares about the underserved by walking into a quarantine zone to distribute food and toys and then dying live on camera from this highly infectious disease before teleporting into a new clone's body. This scene in particular really hit home for me. As I mentioned previously, I was a STEM teacher and a social worker in the island that I'm from, Oahu, and it was my job to help provide opportunities to at-risk and underserved communities in Honolulu. The majority of the people I worked with were children, minorities, immigrants, and about 30% were homeless. As I said, they were like families living out of vans, 2 working parents, but still homeless, and all of them were at or below the poverty line. They didn't have the terminal sci-fi nanotech illnesses like in Altered Carbon, but many of them didn't have medical care to take care of staph infections in their feet from walking around without any footwear, which apparently parents could afford to replace when they got holes, and also if they had diabetes from having fruit punch and Cheetos every day, because that's all they could figure out how to get their hands on. They didn't have any nutritional education. They showed up in with little funds to buy the more expensive, healthier foods. What frustrated me the most was the way that high-level politicians, bureaucrats, and technocrats would come down once a year or whenever they felt like it. Often some fair-skinned, wealthy man in a $5,000 suit to hold the hands of some poor brown kid, one of my students, to win some sort of photo op contest or justify some huge bonus or salary or pay for a $25,000 a year private school tuition for their kids, or their yacht payment, or their multi-million-dollar mortgage in Waikiki, or whatever the hell it was, and smile and vanish for the next 6 months or a year until they needed to have some do some fake philanthropy again, while I was being paid garbage and living out of a car for much of the time, while working 2 jobs, trying to help kids and do something useful rather than accumulate money by having money. The ultra rich abusers, these committers of the greatest violence, and I believe that the meths and the modern ultra rich and capitalists and corporate executives and those types of people are committing the greatest violence. It may be obfuscated by how many shell companies and all this. They can buy the corporate media to they can buy the newspapers and the CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times and all the media, and all they can pay Twitter and Facebook to shadow ban and censor and only show the good things and promote all the information. They can buy the media that they want, that shows them as these beautiful angels and Jesus-like figures standing in an African village barefoot in white long pants and a shirt, holding the hands of these poor children and in China and the solar. Look at these great things that we've done for all these people. Look at this little token school I've built for some poor village. Or look at these poor little Native Hawaiian, Native Polynesian, or these immigrants or these people in the ghetto. Look at how much I've helped these people, by doing mostly nothing, while simultaneously maintaining that entire system of abuse, that entire system of violence, that entire system of inequality and poverty that forces people into positions like having to offer their body up to places like Prick Up, to be to be beaten nightly and raped in a brothel in order to get by, or be literally slaughtered, to slaughter each other nightly for entertainment. Think of any of the big sports and fighting that people are doing. I mean, I'm talking about paid for pay-per-view fighting. These and apart from all the other abuses and under the table, like underpaid $2 a day workers, all the people picking tomatoes for $5 an hour or less, all the serfs and all the people who are working multiple jobs and still struggling to get by in San Francisco, New York, and Hawaii, that violence and all that resulting economic and literal violence, that is the greatest violence, not any particular gunshot, ninja sword, flying, laser shuriken toss, into someone's face. That's not the real violence. The real violence is committed by the meths, and they pay to have it sanitized through things like Bancroft going into this quarantine zone and pretending to be such a great and magnanimous person. He's called out by Takeshi Kovacs as just being theater, and if he really cared about them, he would buy them all new sleeves. And that has been my feeling so many times, and I've been in this situation so many times as a social worker and working with these people, is seeing these people come down and pretend to be such great people and airbrush their demonic selves into saintly icons, and be worshipped as these kind of godlike, benevolent philanthropists, is the most sickening, and that was always the most sickening aspect of my work, and reality itself for me. So Wired gave an unfavorable review of Altered Carbon, the website Wired, writing, to what lengths are the poor willing to go in order to get the bodies they want for themselves or the people they love? Or what about, say, transgender people who might find the opportunity to switch bodies profound and essential liberation? And Wired is basically saying that Altered Carbon brings up a lot of things, but it doesn't really explore a lot of the science fictional and interesting topics very deeply, or at all. So I disagree, and I think, perhaps the reviewer was understandably dizzied by all the fuchsia neon bloom effects, which is de rigueur for cyberpunk nowadays, and 10 hours of near Blade Runner 2049 production values. As I previously mentioned, the scene where a husband and wife are reduced to a zero-G gladiatorial match for the mere entertainment of Bancroft's elite Great Gatsby-esque party is a perfect example of the lengths that the poor will go to. Being forced to kill your loved one over and over every night sounds like a pretty far and nasty length to go to get a better sleeve. Or how about Prick Up, where disenfranchised women and men sell their bodies, often literally allow their Johns to create live snuff films of them, which basically means beating them and killing them, recorded by undiscerning AI hotel owners for future use. Being strangled, having one's forehead caved, or stabbed every night while being forcefully penetrated seems like a pretty horrible job the poor have to do to get by. So that's why I don't get Wired's comment that they don't explore these things deeply. I mean, that's some of the most extreme explorations of the problems of this inequality and the problems of having an immortal class of untouchables and everyone else. That's one of the most extreme examples of it. So I think, I don't know what they were talking about. As for transgender individuals, I think Altered Carbon really illustrates the way that unchecked capitalism ruins everything and everyone, including those who feel bodily dysphoria. It's an interesting conundrum because testosterone pills and genetic reassignment surgery might become moot in this future, as you could simply dislodge a hexagon of elder alien technology from your head and insert your consciousness coin into the X or Y chromosome fabricated body of your choice. But Altered Carbon takes it further. It shows that in a future with mind transfer tech, this problem of feeling alienated from one's body is not limited to souls born into the wrong sleeve, as is the case today. In the beginning of the show, a 7-year-old girl who was murdered gets re-sleeved as per her victim compensation program. Unfortunately, she gets re-sleeved into the body of a middle-aged woman, much to her and her parents' horror. There are several cases of finding oneself in the wrong flesh, including the wife of Vernon Elliott, who gets re-sleeved in a man's body, or the reskinning of a Hispanic grandkid's abuelita, or the grandmother, into a racist skinhead criminal's meat chassis. Takeshi Kovacs himself is a half-Asian, half-Hungarian man in a Nordic body. I have to admit, I wish the trans-ethnic dysphoria could have been better portrayed, but anyways, even today, the testosterone or estrogen hormones, the surgical operations that a transgender individual might want, can cost into the tens of thousands of dollars. It is already prohibitively expensive for many people and something reserved for those with the privilege of access to quality healthcare. Altered Carbon shows a world in which being slotted into the body of not just one's preferred sex, but also one's preferred race, age, size, health, attractiveness, strength, and ability may all be determined by one's class. And in a foregone capitalist system of infinite immortal accumulation, it's likely even more people will be mal-sleeved and thus experience bodily dysphoria. So it's interesting flipping of the problem of not feeling right in your body, but take it to like a whole nother level. And also I think the way in which identity politics, people focusing too much on particular identity politics, or getting their piece of the castle, like having a black person at the meth party, or a female meth, like a female president or a black president or a trans president or a whatever particular, or a disabled meth. Just having a disabled meth, a black meth, a female meth, an Asian meth, a trans meth, a gay meth does not make the society better for everyone. That doesn't bring about a more equal and just society. That makes everybody more equally screwed. It's also interesting that there are several references to sleeve mortgages. As I mentioned, mortgages and pensions are fundamentally methods of leashing the common individuals to the neo-feudal capitalist elite, commanding fealty of lawyers, police, and workers of every kind who live in an ostensibly free and democratic society, but are truly slaves to their corporate masters, like Tanaka is. The pundits are free to say whatever they want within their master's set Overton window of acceptable speech. Academics are free to think whatever increasingly corporatized and for-profit universities allow them to think. Police are free to arrest anyone the rich will let them arrest, and no one is allowed to question the brokenness and malfeasance of the entire system or risk termination for disloyalty. And that's everyone. That's lawyers, bankers, real estate agents, policemen, professors, administrators. Everyone is a feudal subject. They're not a free citizen. And that's the point of neo-feud. The sleeve mortgage, or paying rent on one's own body, is just a further literalization of the ownership of the serfs and peons by the elite. Pay up with money that we fabricated into existence by entering numbers into a privileged central bank server, and or earned by sitting back and letting our invested money make more money, or we will literally take your body and shelve your consciousness in our asset vault. Again, an object, a product, a tool which we will unfreeze and deploy as we need, such as Takeshi Kovacs, who is basically activated by Bancroft when he feels like trotting him out to make a point of his own status by saying, I have the most unique object of all of you other rich elite. So there's this 1% competition, which basically involves using the lower class, or using the non-people, the non-meths, as prizes, trophies, and the main character is actually just another trophy in Bancroft's list of trophies, or as a tool to investigate his murder because he is been dead for 250 years and doesn't have any particular loyalties anyway to anyone, and his obsession with quellism. And so basically it's boredom and desire for status and prestige. Another thing I really liked was the Raylene and Ortega fight scene. That scene involves a lot of characters in a scene. There's a lot of nudity in that, but it's important for the characters to have that particular nudity, and it wouldn't make any sense otherwise. I think that was one of the scenes that really it's kind of like the Matrix bullet time and the effects pioneered there. It's like one of the scenes that really kind of like pushed the boundary a little bit. And as I understand, it took like 8 body doubles and a really coordinated cinematography to get that shot done, and I really like that scene. So there's a character that begins as just a regular person, and it shows the evolution into becoming one of the meths, or one of the immortal super upper class. That was one of the greatest. It was like a variation on the old cone, absolute power corrupts absolutely. In this case, eternal life causes the devaluation of humanity. And this former commoner who becomes a meth references the commoners now as fireflies. Insects, again with the theme of dehumanization and turning of individuals into objects and property. So this that character arc was one of the greatest character developments, I think, in the show, which is really I was like one of my favorite characters. So this is another like kind of like aside fun facts. Takeshi, the main character's name, Takeshi Kovacs, is a reference fairly obvious to people who have seen. Takeshi is a fairly obvious reference to Beat Takeshi Kitano, a Japanese comedian and a mega personality in his own home country of Japan. He's also an alter filmmaker who has produced some great and extremely violent modern Yakuza gangster films. And if you if you've seen any of the Kovacs films, such as like Takeshi Kitano films like Hanabi or Aniki or Brother, he has a lot of really great. They're like basically it's very noir. It's very like ultra violent, like hyper masculine. Like a lot of basically it's like a modern Japanese gangster noir kind of thing. And the character in the type of cinema in the Takeshi Kitano movies it's really obvious that Richard K. Morgan really is a fan and borrows a lot of that and a lot of that goes into Takeshi Kovacs' character. So it's obviously like kind of a homage there. Another fun fact, Takeshi Kitano, the director, as I just mentioned, plays the role of the menacing Yakuza boss hunting down Keanu Reeves' human hard drive character in 1995's Johnny Mnemonic. And Kitano also plays the role of Section 9 boss Aramaki in Ghost in the Shell. So there's two other fun connections of Takeshi Kitano to Cyberpunk and also to Altered Carbon. Johnny Mnemonic and also Ghost in the Shell. So I always found the extrapolation of an intergalactic Yakuza interesting, however unlikely in the far future of Altered Carbon. But I chalk this up to artistic license, an incongruous love letter to the dragon tattooed shoulders that Richard K. Morgan is standing on, and he kind of admits. I am guilty of this sort of postmodern homage often myself. Some reviewers might argue to the point of cheapening the serious and complex themes in a Neophyte, the cyberpunk adventure game that I created, but I would disagree for the same reason that I disagree that the Yakuza cheapens Altered Carbon. I think a good reader or viewer can deal with a gonzo wacky comedy wrapped around a core of cancer serious dystopian tragedy. For example, in the case of Terry Gilliam's Brazil, there are several ludicrous, hilarious scenes, including a man condemned to death due to a simple bureaucratic error being literally smothered in a tornado of semi-sentient paperwork. And also Robert De Niro playing a rogue plumber, a ballsy, a brave chap who races past the rabid bureaucrats to run into people's houses and quickly unclog their pipes. So there's a lot of really silly characters, a lot of cartoonish stuff that happens, and it's really light, very funny stuff. But simultaneously, it also has very tragic elements, and I think a lot of times the comedy, in fact, increases the impact of the more serious parts of Brazil and of Altered Carbon, and I think of all of those works, and that was kind of my attention in Neophyte. A recent article on Inverse, the site Inverse, that suggests shows like Altered Carbon turned cyberpunk into a consumer product, effectively declawing the genre's entire aim. While I understand that where the author of that article is coming from, I must slowly snap on my mirror shades, and that's as slow as I can do it, and give them the finger, as Keanu Reeves would do. Just kidding, I don't really give you the finger. I need it. Anyway, in fact, I actually think Altered Carbon is more Claude than most or all cyberpunk I've seen in the last decade. It has more anti-mega capitalistic retractable scalpel punches to the throat than both Blade Runner 2049 and Ghost in the Shell combined. Yes, it has been received in the Netflix 190 countries spanning 125 million hours of eyeball time per day Imperial robes, but it retains its cyberpunk critique of extreme predatory capitalism despite its production by a world dominated by extreme predatory capitalism, which is some kind of 1 in an Avogadro number good luck, given the miracle of Blade Runner 2049 not being utter cash cow crap. So that's like 2 in a row. It must be a glitch in Nick Bostrom's super intelligent aliens Matrix, who happen to be cyberpunk lovers and are currently farming our reality for cultural products to consume. So yeah, I don't view this. I don't know what these people are saying. That I think they declared Cyberpunk dead in that, which might be a whole nother view in and of itself. But I was afraid that Altered Carbon might be something that represents the death of Cyberpunk, or at least the total commodification and just turning Cyberpunk into a marketing tool and nothing else. But I don't think that. I think Altered Carbon is actually one of the most Cyberpunk things I have seen yet. So, in conclusion, for the final Silver Spook official Cyberpunk rating, this is my final verdict. Altered Carbon gets 4.5 crying Rutger Hauers out of 5 on the Cyberpunk scale. So, Altered Carbon is, a razor scalpel thumbs up in my book. I liked it a lot. I really enjoyed it. Surprised by how much I enjoyed it. It's great Cyberpunk. Congratulations to Richard K. Morgan on the waiting 7 years or 11 years to finally get your book into a show. Great job on the book. Love the books. Everybody should go and read the books and watch the show. Congratulations to the showrunners, actors, and the producers and directors and everyone else involved. It was really great work. Yeah, that's my final answer. So yeah, until next time. Keep your mirror shades reflective.